You inhale something today without a second thought. Maybe it's coffee. Maybe it's alcohol at dinner. Maybe it's a substance far more contested, one that people argue about in courtrooms and living rooms alike. You assume this is a modern debate, a modern discovery, a distinctly human invention of the last century. But the real answer is far stranger. Somewhere in the mountains of what is now Western China, more than 2,500 years ago, a group of mourners built a small fire inside a wooden chamber at a funeral, and something drifted up from the flames that changed how their brains worked for the rest of that night. They had no word for THC. They had no concept of a cannabinoid receptor. They only knew that the smoke from this particular plant did something none of their other fires did. Archaeobotanist Robert Spengler, who has spent years tracing the deep history of plants across Eurasia, helped identify burnt residue found inside wooden braziers at a burial site called Jirzhankal Cemetery, high in the Pamir Mountains. When his team analyzed the charred material, they found chemical signatures consistent with cannabis. But not just any cannabis. The plant residue showed unusually high levels of the psychoactive compound your body now recognizes instantly. This wasn't accidental. Someone deliberately had selected plants more potent than the wild variety growing nearby. Think about what that means. Before written history in that region, before anyone could explain why, humans were already distinguishing between ordinary cannabis and something stronger. They didn't understand chemistry. They understood effect. Your brain is built to notice altered states, because altered states have always mattered to survival. Chemist and researcher Ethan Russo, who has studied the pharmacology of cannabis extensively, has pointed out that the compounds in the plant interact with a system inside the human body called the endocannabinoid system, a network of receptors your body produces its own natural version of. This system didn't appear because humans started using cannabis. It's ancient, embedded deep in vertebrate biology, involved in memory, mood, and pain regulation long before any plant entered the picture. Cannabis didn't create a new door in your brain. It found one that was already there, already built, already waiting. That's the twist most people never learn. The high wasn't a hijacking of your ancestors' minds. It was a conversation between a plant and a biological system your ancestors already carried inside them, inherited from creatures that existed millions of years before the first human ever lit a fire. Picture that mourner in the Pamir Mountains again. Grief is one of the oldest human experiences there is. Loss doesn't need language to hurt. And in a ritual meant to process that loss, something in the smoke softened the edges of the pain, slowed the racing thoughts, pulled the moment into a strange, dream-like focus. Why wouldn't a species desperate for relief from grief keep doing that, generation after generation, long before anyone understood the mechanism? There's a pattern here that echoes far beyond cannabis. Ethnobotanist Wade Davis, who has documented plant use across dozens of indigenous cultures worldwide, has argued that nearly every traditional society on Earth developed some relationship with a psychoactive plant, whether it was tobacco, coca, peyote, or fermented drink. This wasn't a coincidence repeated by accident across unconnected continents. It suggests something built into how human minds engage with the natural world. Plants that alter consciousness got noticed, got remembered, got passed down, often wrapped in ritual, myth, and careful rules about when and how they should be used. Here's what's easy to miss if you only think about the plant. The ritual mattered as much as the chemistry. Ancient cannabis use, in nearly every early archaeological context researchers have uncovered, isn't casual. It's ceremonial. It shows up at funerals, in shamanic practices, in communal gatherings meant to mark something significant, a transition, a loss, a passage into adulthood. Your ancestors weren't using this plant to numb boredom on an ordinary afternoon. They were using it to mark the moments that mattered most. That distinction says something about your own relationship with altered states today, whether it's a glass of wine at a wedding or something stronger at a gathering meant to mourn. The impulse to reach for something that shifts your mind during life's heaviest moments isn't a modern habit picked up from popular culture. It's an old one, stretching back further than writing, further than agriculture, possibly further than your species itself. Consider what your ancestors were working with, and without. No printed warnings, no dosage guidelines, no scientific paper explaining what compound did what to which receptor. Only observation, passed carefully from one person to another. Trial, ritual, repetition, and somehow, across cultures with no contact with one another, similar conclusions kept emerging. Certain plants deserved respect. Certain plants belonged to sacred moments. Certain plants were not for everyday use. That instinct, buried so deep it predates recorded history, still shapes how modern societies argue about these same substances today. The plant hasn't changed much. What's changed is the framework built up around it. Legal systems, cultural taboos, medical research, entire industries built on something a mourner in the Pamir Mountains once burned beside a body they loved and lost. Think about your own reactions the next time this topic comes up in conversation. Whether you're for it, against it, or somewhere uncertain in between. That reaction isn't purely modern opinion. It's layered on top of something ancient, an inherited wariness and fascination toward substances that touch the same receptors your body has carried since long before humans existed at all. There's something worth sitting with here. The line between medicine, ritual, and recreation has never been as clean as modern arguments assume. Your ancestors in the mountains of ancient China weren't debating legality. They were responding to a biological reality your body still carries today. A system built to notice, to remember, and to reach for anything that might soften the unbearable weight of loss. Go back even further, and the story only gets stranger. Genetic research into the cannabis plant itself, published by a team led by biologist Luca Fumagalli, traced the origins of the species to the Tibetan Plateau, tens of thousands of years before the Jerzankal burials. Long before any human deliberately cultivated it, cannabis was already growing wild across the grasslands of Central Asia, alongside the earliest human populations moving through the region. Your ancestors didn't invent this plant's effects. They simply arrived in a world where it already existed, growing quietly at the edges of their campsites, waiting to be noticed. That timeline matters, because it means the relationship between humans and this plant wasn't a single moment of discovery. It was a slow, repeated encounter, played out across thousands of generations, in dozens of separate regions, long before anyone wrote anything down. Each time, the pattern likely unfolded the same way. Someone burned it, or ate it, or brewed it, and noticed the shift. Told someone else. That knowledge moved from person to person the way all survival knowledge once did, through memory, story, and demonstration, not through labels or dosage charts. Consider how differently this compares to almost every other plant your ancestors encountered. Most plants got sorted into simple categories: edible, inedible, poisonous, medicinal for a specific wound or illness. Cannabis didn't fit neatly into any of those boxes. It didn't fill your stomach. It didn't heal a wound on contact. What it did was alter perception itself, which meant your ancestors had to invent an entirely new category of meaning for it, one tied not to the body's basic needs, but to the mind's experience of time, memory, and emotion. That's a remarkable cognitive leap for a species without writing. It required your ancestors to recognize that a plant could act not on the body alone, but on the felt experience of being alive. Once that leap was made, it rippled outward. Ritual specialists, the earliest shamans and spiritual leaders in many cultures, often became the ones entrusted with such substances, precisely because altering consciousness was treated as dangerous, powerful, and not to be handled carelessly. That single choice, to restrict and ritualize rather than use freely and constantly, may be one of the earliest examples of humans regulating their own behavior around something they didn't fully understand, but respected anyway. Think about what discipline that required. A plant capable of shifting mood and perception was growing freely nearby, and yet evidence suggests it wasn't used constantly, carelessly, or without context. It was reserved. It was framed by ceremony. Your ancestors, without any scientific understanding of tolerance, addiction, or neurochemistry, arrived independently across separate cultures at a similar instinct. Treat this carefully, and only at the moments that call for it most. You inhale something today without a second thought. Somewhere in your oldest biology, a system built long before language, long before ritual, long before grief had a name, is still quietly listening for exactly what that mourner's fire once offered without either of them ever knowing why.